didactic part of the topic. And today's didactic is a very vast one, and I think it's too big to discuss. But uh, I will be presenting the didactic myself, Prabhat. I am medicinal professor at Department of Psychiatry, works in Center for Addiction Medicine. Yeah, obviously the slides are modified slides from Dr. Pratima and Dr. Deepak, who has done it initially. I have just modified, added, and I requested Dr. Benegal and a couple of experts to supplement the information what I will present. Okay, it's a very huge topic, and a lot of things are happening in this area, as all of us ever. Let me start with the presentation. Okay, I don't have any conflict of interest. As I told, current presentation is based on combination of guidelines, various guidelines in different literature, and our clinical experience at Center for Addiction Medicine, Nimans, which I work. These objectives of the presentation is that I'll outline in the treatment of alcohol addiction, pharmacological agents for prevention of relapse, advantages and limitations. Now, factors helping to choose an appropriate drug. At this part, I will briefly mention. Dr. Vivek will take a session towards the end. We last week of February on how to choose a medicine as per the person's addiction and severity and so many other factors. But I will just briefly touch this strength of recommendation and areas of uncertainties. Now, let's look at dependence as a non-communicable disease model. It's a chronic relapsing brain disorder and its interaction between host, that is genetical susceptibility. As all of us know, 60 to 70% of the alcohol addiction is genetically determined. Agent, the drug, and the obviously mediated by the environmental factors like availability, susceptibility, stress, and other pattern of use. Now, I'll speak about three patient case vignette. I want you to listen about the cases and probably think about the best suitable agent. At the end of the presentation, you can take your suggestions. First patient one, a 34-year-old male, so drinking alcohol for the last 19 years, developed dependence before 25 years of age, family history of alcohol dependence, very impulsive, difficult in completing tasks unless very interesting, bright but not reflected on in studies or work, never stayed in one job. Patient 2, a 50-year-old divorced male, started drinking at the age of 46 after his divorce from his wife. Daughters are living with their husbands. Lives alone, no contact, very poor contact with friends. Feels sad on most days and gets anxious whenever he thinks about the future and is unable to sleep. Drinks to forget everything and sleep. To get sleep. Drinking reduces the pain in his life. Number 3. A 36-year-old female consuming alcohol for the past 10 years. Remember, it's a female. Episodically increases her drinking associated with picking arguments, singing loudly, being disinhibited. Once in 2 years, it happens. Behavior changes lasting for 3 to 4 months. And mother had an history of an episodic mental illness. So there are three different cases. Now, if you look at is that management all one approach will work all three cases? I think most of us agree that is no. Although all three cases presents with the outcome of alcohol addiction, but obviously the intervention will definitely differ, and one approach will not going to work for all the three cases. Other dilemma here. Now, do you target abstinence or versus harm reduction? That is your strategy. Will come back. Now, what are the targets of treatment? First target is probably managing withdrawal symptom. Last session we had a discussion about withdrawal symptom and supplementing the deficiency, nutritional and vitamin deficiency. Second, you look at long-term adaptation. As you know, the alcohol addiction being a chronic brain disorder, there will be a long-term changes in the different areas of the brain. Third is the vulnerability factor. Now, why out of so many people, few people get into the full-blown addictive brain disease? Definitely there are vulnerability. I'll briefly touch about the vulnerability in few slides, and the prevent the chance of relapses, and obviously support. The aim of the treatment in a alcohol dependence is probably promote complete abstinence if possible, stabilize acute medical and psychiatric condition as needed, increase the motivation for recovery, initiate treatment for chronic medical and psychiatric condition if the comorbidity, enhance coping and relapse prevention skills, and improve the functioning of the person. A comprehensive management plan should cover up these factors: detoxification, symptomatic treatment, comorbidities, tackling neuroadaptation by different medicines, anti-craving, deterrents, and stimulants. Look at the vulnerability factors which makes the person relapsing or initiating, relapsing, and going back again and again. Plan for relapse, and obviously you need to enhance the support in a different way to make him abstinent or make him sober for the rest of life. Pharmacological treatment start with the assessment, motivation. Assessment has three parts: motivation, dependence, comorbidity, detoxification, and long-term. Now, broadly, there are two groups of drug in a long-term management, either deterrents or anti-craving. Now, there is a debate between the deterrence model. Now, deterrence means complete stoppage. There is abstinence model. Now, here is focus on is complete abstinence. So, it coincides with the alcohol anonymous approach or rehab approach. Drug which has been used mostly cost effective, but family involvement is the idea. But again, you should remember dependence is a chronic disorder and there is neuroadaptation. So sometimes it is not practically possible to keep people completely abstinent, and unless he is very highly motivated, good compliance and family supervision, which is not so easy. And it's difficult in those with poor social support, and there is a abstinence violation effect and guilt. And obviously you use disulfiram, which is a deterrent drug, its own issues. Right. Now look at harm reduction model. Now here the focus is harm reduction and continued treatment even if client lapses. And this is the model we promote and we normally practice. Even the person is not able to stop completely, we don't stop treatment. We encourage him to continue treatment, allow the engagement in these who are in contemplation. So the aim is move with them into further higher risk of motivation, and there's no risk of having a very serious disulfiram methanol reaction if you are not following deterrent. And it follows the line of a non-communicable disease. Let's look at example of hypertension. In hypertension, along with your medication, it changes the lifestyle, the environment, so everything goes together. And obviously we'll briefly talk about Sinclair method towards end. This model requires effective communication to the client, and family need to be understood. Often family comes to you asking that my son should be completely abstinent. So you need to speak with them and make them understanding the point, which Dr. Benagala was speaking some long case. Now it's not not like the lay concept of treatment. Normally people believe that treatment means complete abstinence. It requires compliance, and medications are obviously a little costly. Okay, so I just taken one guideline. There's lots of guideline. We thought one guideline by NICE, that is NHS UK. Abstinence is the appropriate goal for most people with alcohol dependence and people who misuse alcohol and have significant psychiatric or physical condition. For them, obviously, abstinence is a must or appropriate. When a service user prefers a goal of moderation, but it comes with considerable risk also. Advise strongly that abstinence is the most appropriate. Do not refuse treatment services to service users who do not agree to go for abstinence. See, again, the bottom line here is engagement rather than refusing the person who doesn't want to stop immediately. I'll skip this one. Now, before I go, just one slide about the neurobiology so that you get some idea. It's a little complex. Probably sometime later we have a full neurobiology sessions. I don't want to bombard with this whole slide. Only one point I want to tell you in alcohol addiction, in all addiction. So you can see a lot of receptors are involved. You can see in the blue color is all opioid receptor, then norepinephrine, enkephalin, opioid, and red is glutamate. Yellow is the path reward system from accumbens to mental document area. If you summarize, this is how it happens. So euphoria and pleasure is regulated by dopamine and opioid. Anxiolysis, ataxia is by GABA. Sedation, GABA, and decrease in NMDA. Nausea by 5-HT3. Neuroadaptation, NMDA is glutamate receptor and 5-HT. Stress, corticotrophin releasing factor, hypothalamic pituitary axis plays a role here. Withdrawal, GABA, and NMDA. So as you see, the host of receptors who are working in this area. So it's unlikely to get a single drug which is going to work. So that's why the treatment of addiction.
Can I just stop you there, because I think the Fogarty group has just joined us, and I just wanted to put them into the picture that we finished discussing our clinical cases, and what we are doing right now is a brief seminar at the end of the clinical discussion. And Dr. Prabhat is talking about the pharmacological management of craving and reward. Sorry to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, welcome Fogarty group to the presentation. So, as I was speaking, that in the neurobiologically there is huge number of receptors who work for the alcohol dependence, and that makes really difficult to find a single drug which can work for addiction and for alcohol addiction. So most of the drug discovery is targeted about the specific receptor. Now, broadly, I will speak about the 4 areas of the receptor: opioid, glutamate, GABA, and serotonin. Let's start with the opioid, and let's finish the first part where we have approved drugs or were probably used more commonly. First one, we start with naltrexone. So naltrexone is most widely studied drug in the pharmacological treatment of alcohol dependence. You can have almost 30 to 35 RCTs and some thousands of patients been used naltrexone in the clinical trial. It's an opioid receptor antagonist. Now, how it works? It prevents the opioid receptor mediated euphoric and rewarding effects of alcohol, diminish the rewarding aspects of alcohol induced dopamine release, and by blunting the subsequent craving for alcohol. So if you look at this picture, you can see a path from nucleus accumbens to ventral tegment area to nucleus accumbens, and you can see the beta endorphin pathway where the naltrexone works. So alcohol releases the opioid peptides, which in turn gives to a rewarding effects to alcohol. And opioid antagonist supposedly suppress the alcohol induced reward. So the basic purpose of the mechanism in which it works is suppressing the alcohol induced reward in the person with alcohol dependence. What is evidence for that? Now you can see a survival analysis here. It significantly reduces return to heavy drinking, probably reduces the lapse to relapse. Now there are some studies showing that the people with family history positive or genetically high risk are probably more responsive to naltrexone treatment than not. I will come back and tell which polymorphism is responsible. Now the question: does it work? Sorry. In a Cochrane review, found that naltrexone reduced the risk of heavy drinking to 83% of the risk compared to placebo group. Okay. I think I'll skip this one. Yeah. Now the dosage you give 50 milligram per day tablets. Now we have used higher dosage. In our center we do use higher dosage also, but as per literature apparently not effective, not much beneficial, but again individually it might work. We have used till 150 milligram per day in our patients. Now the depot preparation, that is once a month, is not yet available in India but been used in abroad, and it's available in 380 milligram once a month. Naltrexone is generally well tolerated, except around 10% people complain of nausea, headache, anxiety, sedation, but in general okay. Now hepatotoxicity has been reported, particularly people who has pre-existing liver disease. So it's a good idea to do a baseline LFT before you start an naltrexone. The question: when to start? Now this is the probably the selling point of these anti-craving drugs nowadays. And now you can start even when the guy is drinking or soon after stopping drinking. So you need not have to wait for detox being over, wait for 5-6 days or 10 days, then you can start. It's not like that. So you can start immediately while on drinking. Now if he's not working a month, let's say 4 to 6 weeks, then probably it's not worth continuing. Now if he's working, then how long to continue? Now there's no clarity. The reason being, most of the drug trials on naltrexone are maximum of 3 months, but probably 6 months to 1 year is the best time that you should continue naltrexone, and then if everything is going fine, you can think of withdrawing. Now this is the who are the people who should get maximum benefit. Now people who are drinking heavily, has a positive family history that I mentioned that time, if they have functional polymorphism at ASP40 allele of opioid mu opioid receptor gene, then they are the guys who are likely to get maximum benefit with this molecule. Okay, moving to the next. I hope it's audible to all of you. Just raise your hand and indicate. Okay. The next is acamprosate. Now acamprosate works both on glutamate and GABAergic system. As you know, acamprosate is a NMDA antagonist. NMDA is a receptor for the glutamate. So the excitatory neurotransmitter NMDA contributes to alcohol in many effects. NMDA antagonist acamprosate reduces the intensity of post-cessation alcohol craving on exposure on high-risk drinking situation. The basic point here is that it being an antagonist, it reduces the craving of the craving related to glutamatergic path. Now, in general, it's a poorly absorbed drug, so there is a reason you have to give a huge amount of acamprosate to a patient. I mean, as 2000 milligram per day, because as you know, the bioavailability is hardly 10%. Excreted unmetabolized, so it's a good drug. You can use with the people with alcohol liver disease unless they're very significant. Should be used in caution with renal impairment because it goes through kidney. So if the renal failure, probably not used. And also a better, one of the good thing about this molecule, you can combine with either naltrexone or disulfiram safely without much side effects. Now, evidence, is moderately effective in increasing in the amount of abstinence after detoxification. Now, in the acamprosate studies, the goal was kept as abstinence, but in naltrexone studies, goals are become reduction of the heavy drinking. So it's very difficult to compare both the studies. The goals, outcome of the studies are different in both the studies, both the drugs. It's available in 333 milligram tablet. I've written the dosage below. So it's generally well tolerated. Now, GI symptoms like diarrhea is the most common side effect, but clinically it's not very significant. Hardly anybody, and few people do complain of loose motions, and it stabilizes in few days. So otherwise, it's one of the safer drug to use without any major problem. Again, come to point when to start. Again, here is also good thing that you can start during detoxification itself. In the past, they used to tell that you should wait for 4 to 5 days before you start, but recently, on behalf of its NMDA antagonist and neuroprotective effect, you should start this molecule in the detoxification time itself. Again, if it doesn't work for 1 month or 1.5 months, it's not worth continuing. Fortunately, the trials in acamprosates are much longer, almost 1 year, compared to trials of NCT and naltrexone, which is around 3 months. So 1 year is the ideal time to continue. Also, interestingly, you can see the right side, the effect size of abstinence increases with duration. Now, if you give 3 months, if effect size is 1.33, and 12 months, it become 1.95. So the point is that you give long time, the chances that person will do better with acamprosate. Now, whom to give? And this is very difficult in acamprosate because I don't think there is enough matching can be done with acamprosate literature available at this point of time. Probably more severely dependent. But at this point of time, we don't have any much idea about the matching of acamprosate with the drinking and other vulnerability factors. Okay, I'll just touch on deterrents before I come to the next set of the new drugs. This is one of the oldest drugs. There is a disulfiram, as the term suggests. Deterrence means the prevention from action by fear of the consequences. So basically, it's not a true drug by that sense. As a true drug should work in the body and produce some action. Here is the drug which will produce the action only when you drink alcohol. Otherwise, it's not going to produce anything. So often it's been blamed as a psychological pill, probably rightly or wrongly. Right. So one of the oldest and time-tested treatment of alcoholism. Most of us started career with disulfiram, and knowing that probably doesn't work with everybody, we shifted to other drugs. Dose is 250 milligram per day, but you can increase to around 500 to 1000 milligram per day. As you know, it's interfere. Yeah, this is a little old study, but again, you should remember this is not a RCT. This is an open label study in a private setting where a lot of intensive treatment was given in a small local community where it is found to be very effective. But again, it has been not replicated in none of the study in the other part of the world. So in this study, they found that disulfiram was much better than topiramate and altrexone, also acamprosate. Again, it has own limitations. Coming to the how it works. Now here, alcohol metabolized acetaldehyde, and disulfiram works in the blocking the aldehyde dehydrogenase. I'm sure most of you are aware of this fact. This blockage of aldehyde dehydrogenase makes the acetaldehyde accumulated in the body, which lead to a disulfiram ethanol reaction. And these are the common symptoms of disulfiram ethanol reaction. We have flushing, throbbing, headache, vertigo, chest pain. So many symptoms are there, and that is the major objective, that person should not drink alcohol when he is on disulfiram. And it may be sometimes life-threatening, like respiratory depression or cardiovascular collapse, infarction, unconsciousness. So that means, yeah, again, the intensity of the disulfiram ethanol reaction does varies with the amount of alcohol as well as the amount of disulfiram. And I think one point is missing here is the enzymatic degradation of the person's cytochromal system. So they have been pointed out that you get a mild reaction when you have 5 to 10 milligram, or you can get a severe reaction when you take more. Last point is important. Now, if you are giving disulfiram to somebody, you should mention very clearly that even he stops disulfiram for next 10 days to 2 weeks, he might get a reaction if he continues, if he drinks alcohol, even if he is not on disulfiram. So, because the point is that effect lasts almost for 10 to 14 days after stopping the disulfiram last dose. Again, in general, it is a safe drug. Only some mild headache, I think garlic-like smell in the mouth. Significant problem which some people do develop are peripheral neuropathy, liver dysfunction, and psychosis. So, as I told, it's a drug, it's deterrent. So you need to take a lot of precautions. You have to fully inform the patient about the disulfiram alcohol reaction. Strongly caution not to drink alcohol while on drug. I mean, even anything that contains spirit or ethyl alcohol should be avoided, like sauce, vinegar, cough, these things. Yeah, again, contraindications, people who are taking metronidazole or paraldehyde, or people taking alcohol or alcohol containing preparations, presence of severe myocardial disease, coronary occlusion, psychosis, inability to understand the implication of therapy, like people with head injury, cognitive deficits are not at all suitable, people who are impulsive, people who have difficulty in personality and temperament are not fit for the therapy. Now the question is, it's effectively only when you get highly motivated to quit. Now this is one of the biggest challenge here. Now if a person is highly motivated and getting them to treatment network is much easier. But majority of cases when you see in practice are people with lower middle level of motivation. So to get the best out of it, you need people who have a good social support, involve the family and colleague, educate the patient, obtain consent, and obviously disulfiram card. Okay, this is a form which we use in NIMHANS as a disulfiram consent form. And any of you want to use this form, you let us know. We'll send a copy to you. We have a disulfiram card also. Probably I forgot to scan it. So that card can be kept in the patient, and I want to use it. So preferably, as I told, supervised and follow up every weekly or every 2 weekly a month. I think those who develop a disulfiram ethanol reaction, you need to give a supportive therapy, mostly assurance, observation, or some intravenous fluids. Now, when to start disulfiram? Start disulfiram at least, this is very important, at least one day you should be off alcohol. Start around 250 milligram per day, and you can increase the dosage if it doesn't have a reaction with 250 milligram. Minimum you give for 6 months. Before starting treatment, it's good to have a liver function test and check about the symptom of any neuropathic symptoms. Now, I have not gone to the effectiveness of disulfiram, but I mentioned that disulfiram is a drug which is probably reserved for very few people who are very well motivated. Now, at this point of time in our clinics in Center for Addiction Medicine, disulfiram usage will be hardly 10%, and with better understanding of the neurobiological mechanism of the addiction, its use has been come down. Now, why? Because we have spoke about naltrexone, acamprosate, and disulfiram. Now, these three are supposed to be approved. But again, you should remember, look at the response rate with acamprosate or naltrexone. It's hardly modest. Now, if you look at NNT value, number needed to treat is 9 to 11. I mean, it means you want to get a good effect or some effect, you treat 9 patients. So, if you give 9 patients naltrexone or acamprosate, the chance that 1% will respond. So that is not the ideal pharmacological treatment. I mean, ideal treatment will be one. You give one medicine, one drug, person should respond completely. Now here you're talking about giving 9 to 10 people to get one response. So in that context, it's not a very rosy situation as a clinician. Going a trial on the patient and expecting him to respond, and he will be 1 out of lucky 10. And that has actually fueled the idea that we need to find something new drugs. And of late, fortunately, in last 5-6 years, a lot of newer agents has come up and has been definitely showing a promising results. Again, as I told you, they're not approved but very widely used in places. So I've just summarized the names. I'll speak few of the drugs in detail. Now let's which are the primary, like let's say top 5 drug. The top 5 drug will be probably baclofen. Again, these are comments from our side. Is widely prescribed. I think most of the people do agree with us. Topiramate is one of the famous drug. Gabapentin. Then we have a serotonergic group, SSRIs and ondansetron. Now it was used before little more, but now has come down. Atypical antipsychotic has been actually one of the recently used more commonly. Quetiapine and enalapril. We have a lot of experience with quetiapine and enalapril also. Now, one of the emerging drug I will talk about, probably will touch on this. We can take on discussion is prazosin. Now, prazosin has been work with the HPA axis. As you know, stress, CRF, stress, alcohol are very viciously related, and prazosin will be beneficial for these people. As Dr. Venegal and our team was talking about, varenicline use in alcohol dependence has started coming up. Although we have not used much for alcoholism in our center, but we have definitely used much more for nicotine addiction. But these are the major top front drugs. There are a few more I've skipped for a thing. I will talk about one of the drug which we have more experience in our center is baclofen, which works through glutamate GABA. Now, baclofen is a GABA-B agonist. Now, the hypothesis of how it works, the GABA-B receptors counteracts the ventral tegmental nucleus accumbens dopamine response to alcohol. So, if the stimulation of ventral tegmental area GABA-B receptors, it inhibits the firing of activity of the mesolimbic dopamine neurons. If you simplify it, if a person drinks alcohol, as you know, the dopamine goes on firing. Now, GABA-B, it counteracts that thing. So, even if a person drinks alcohol on baclofen, the firing will be less. So, also there are other complex mechanism. Now, dosage around 10 milligram TID, and it can go to higher doses. Now, higher doses are found to be superior to the initial studies about 30 milligram. Now, you can go much higher. We do use 80, 100, 120, 160 doses also. That is there is one of the best part of baclofen, that it doesn't cause much problem. Now, although the initial results are very promising, but recent results has been counteracting. But again, you should remember European study predominantly done in the cirrhotic patient, 60 milligram is effective. In US study, recently non-effective, but there are a lot of methodological differences, and it's very difficult to generalize the findings. Now, what is the advantage of this drug? There are minimal side effects. It has an excellent hepatic safe profile. That is the thing, because most of the alcohol dependent subjects will have liver complications, and you can safely give this drug. Patients who continue to drink alcohol while being treated with baclofen did not show any sign of complications. So, if person actively drinking, you can definitely give baclofen without any much worry. No addictive potential, and also some literature, coming that it might be more beneficial among the people who have greater anxiety and withdrawal symptoms. Now, I'll talk about topiramate, which is anticonvulsant. And now it has multiple mechanisms of action. I will not go detail about that. It has been decreased, associated with decreased alcohol craving. You can know the Benkory Johnson study where he have reported to using almost 300 milligram, 150 to 300 milligram twice a day. Start with 25 milligram. It takes some time, almost a week to build it up, but there is significant decrease in the heavy drinking days and harmful drinking. Again, can be started among the patient while still drinking. One of the biggest limitation, again, it's a clinical experience. The people don't tolerate topiramate well. I mean, not all, but definitely people don't. It's not a very patient-friendly drug. A lot of people do complain about a test problem, some dullness in their, difficulty in concentration, paresthesia. So slowly, and that is one of the biggest limitations in drug, and that's the reason the compliance has not been very, and often it is very difficult to go up to 300 milligram because of the side effects. Okay, last part is the serotonin receptor. Ondansetron is one of the drug which has been used for quite some time in this alcohol dependence. Although recently is not be using so common. It's an anti-nauseating drug, anti-vomiting drug. It reduces the positive symptom effect of with abuse liability of alcohol. Ondansetron reduces preference for high alcohol doses. A few RCTs have found effective, but again, you have better drugs now. And one of the major challenge in India giving ondansetron to get the 4 microgram medication. So often you have to give the ondansetron syrup and you have to titrate to the patients. Again, now coming to true SSRI like sertraline or citalopram, the evidence is not very strong. Guidelines are not recommending it when there is only alcohol. Probably it may be titrated in the patient who has comorbid depression rather than the only alcohol problem. Okay. Now how to choose? Let's see. This is a very generic one. Obviously, it's not the correct one, not the perfect one. Now somebody who want to complete abstinence, normal LFT, supervision possible, compliance assured. I mean, this is a very very rosy situation, the best situation, which often not true. That disulfiram. So obviously that's the reason I told in our clinic, not I think less than 10% people are getting disulfiram now, because you don't get this type of cohort. Probably in the general practice or in the in the community centers it might work, but not in a specialized addiction center. Now somebody who is controlled drinking, normal LFT, naltrexone can be considered. Disease LFT, accompanied baclofen and topiramate. Role of combination, yeah, combination can be tried. We normally do combination treatment. Okay, see, so now let's come back to the patient one. I thought before I come to final setup slide, I'll take your opinion about the first case. You can chat and let me know. Yeah, what will be your choice in this gentleman? To start from here. So this case, what will be the first? Okay.
Dr. Mukesh Swami asked consideration regarding cost of therapy.
Okay, we'll get back to that. Let's see, take the first question. Which drug you will feel best for this person? Naltrexone. Oh, everybody naltrexone, what happened? Naltrexone. So here most of our residents are telling naltrexone. Okay. Methylphenidate. I think definitely.
Naltrexone, Dr. Bhuvneshwaran,
yeah, I think Dr. Saurabh's point is naltrexone plus stimulant. I think we definite, and SM Dr. Bhuvneshwaran also methylphenidate. Dr. Srinath topiramate. That's good. Anything else?
Dr. Saurabh is saying naltrexone with stimulant.
Okay, stimulant. Okay, so options are. I have not deliberately spoken about the adjunct treatment. I'll show a slide on that. Because of time constraint, but I think okay, patient preference. But Dr. Sarani, you have to decide our preference first, also in the mind. But I think I'll agree. But probably let's take our preference. Naltrexone is a consensus. What about baclofen? Nobody is speaking. Yeah. Okay. So I think naltrexone, plus minus methylphenidate stimulant, topiramate. Let's see. Second case. We'll get back. What about this case? Baclofen, acamprosate,
SSRIs,
baclofen. That's good. Right. Baclofen, SSRI. So there is very lot of consensus in this. SSRI, baclofen plus SSRI plus baclofen. Basically, we're looking at a depressive symptomatology with a craving, but again, it's fine. Okay, last case. What about this case? Okay, SSRI.
SSRI
No,
plus
not this is a previous case. I think Saurabh has written SSRI plus baclofen.
Acamprosate.
Acamprosate. Dr.
For this
Abhikant
one, patient
is telling
A.
acamprosate.
Valproate.
Dr. Bhuvanesaran Valproate. Dr. Sinath Topiramate. Saurabh mood stabilizer plus. I think, but I think goal is very common. I think whatever you, all of you have actually able to pick up that there is a definite bipolarity, a comorbidity, and you have to have mood stabilizer plus something, or you can take a call. I think
Baclofen is coming to be.
okay. So we have some degree of consensus that we have, right.
Can I just
Yes, definitely, sir.
see, one of the things in all these three patients, and in fact, this is taken from a workshop that we did a long time back. These patients' profiles were selected. Is that this gives you an impression that addiction does not live alone. It clusters. It always clusters with something. Addiction is an epiphenomenon of an underlying psychiatric disorder. In most cases, it does not live alone. And therefore, the treatment of addiction, whether it is pharmacological or non-pharmacological, can never be just the tip of the iceberg alone. And this has been the problem that has been there since the last, historically. And it's only lately in the last 10, 15 years we've been trying to look at a more complete, more holistic treatments. And I'm glad that Prabhat has brought these three patients up, because it shows you exactly that when you need to plan for treatment of addiction, you need to actually plan for treatment of the underlying disorder. And as we've seen, pharmacologically also, you can't just get away with treating just the addiction, and then that leads to frequent relapses. That leads to the kind of revolving door pattern that is known to people who deal with addiction. And I think that should stop. The message should be loud and clear that the era of just treating the tip of the iceberg is over. We need to look at it holistically.
Thank you, sir. I'll probably what Dr. Benegal has spoken. I'll end with that last slide, after 2 slides, where you can see how you look addiction as a, unfortunately, the term, I sometimes wonder the term should not be there at all. Term is too stigmatizing and make people thinking, and not to us, throughout the world. Wherever you work, you see there such a discrete division between these things, and it's reflected in guidelines and whatever was discussed. Okay, let me.
Dr. Ravikant has raised a point that regular toddy consumption is so culturally accepted in rural Telangana that almost 50% general population drinks daily. So comorbidity is less often seen.
Well, that's not addictive disorder. Let's also make it very clear that addiction is as he started out, Prabhat started out saying, this is a chronic brain disorder, which affects about 5% of the population. Harmful drinking affects culture, is a cultural thing, and it can affect anything from 15% of the population to 20% of the population. Just drinking or drinking regularly is not an addictive disorder. Or even drinking and having problems does not mean you have addiction. We should be very, very clear what we mean by addiction or dependence, as opposed to harmful drinking. And the two should not be mixed together. The problem is that because of social, cultural, and political issues, anybody who drinks is called an addict in India, or anybody who smokes cannabis is called an addict. And then this whole thing comes in, where social stigma, all these things come in and mitigate against proper treatment of the problem. So I think we need to be very clear about that. You're going to show a slide.
I'll just finish up. So, I think this is somehow I try to summarize. Although I'm not very happy with the whole presentation, but again, I thought for the on the part of the presentation and for the some degree consensus, I'll just last slide. So these are some leads, because acamprosate can be used to improve abstinence rates started even when person drinking. Naltrexone can be used to reduce risk of lapse, becoming relapse. So again, the message is that you should not always think complete abstinence is the goal. there are nowadays very clear message that engagement, looking at a profession holistically, looking at vulnerability should always be tried. Yeah, not much evidence between what to choose, except that higher family loading and early onset probability support interaction. Disulfiram, yeah, still old things, effective if motivated. Baclofen should be considered if patient wants to be abstinent, has high levels of anxiety, has not benefited from other treatment. Topiramate reduces the lapses. Uncertainties is the biggest uncertainties because the way the addiction looked at. So that has actually increased the uncertainties. People looked at addiction as a single construct. And then we will ask the question, who is likely to benefit? Is there a way to personalize the using? And now people are talking about this concept, which is very good. I mean, the next slide I'll speak about endophenotype or some sort of subtype of alcoholism to find out what are the factors, and can you personalize the treatment, and can you at least put a hand, this is the guy who needs this treatment, how long to give. And I thought this is also a new thing coming of role of non-invasive techniques like TMS, TDS, and comorbidities. Okay, and finally this PPT symptom. So if you look at, you see withdrawal symptom, treat withdrawal management, then you go to the, as you know, allostasis, where you distinguish between early onset and late onset. You have so many options in this. Then you look at second part of allostasis, where you have to target at unchanged habits, structure activity, probably using the cognitive work. Look at alternate high physical exercise and yogic exercise to increase the frontal activity. We normally, this is how we approach in our center. We try to divide them as early onset and late onset, and not only we, throughout the world people are thinking these as endophenotypes, and they look at ADHD, temperament, associated temperament, risky behavior. As you see, the first case we discussed today, which I mean, in the second case we not explored, but definitely the first case is the case who falls in the first category, irrespective of the what drug it takes. That is not the issue here. What it takes. The issue is what started early versus late. Then you look at the symptomatology. Then you plan accordingly. These are a few things, you know. Yes, so this is the slide. I'll stop here, and I'm leaving this slide. This is the overall map of managing a case of alcohol dependence, irrespective of the agents and decide. I'll stop here and open up for discussion or in comment, suggestion. Okay. Any questions?
Here again, I still can't sort of digest the idea. Within 4 and 6 weeks, if you don't stop drinking alcohol, you know, just no use using naltrexone or compressate. I think at least 12 weeks minimum, along with psychosocial methods, has to be tried.
Yeah, I agree with madam, that, but here you see, when you start naltrexone, your idea is not of abstinence at all. You start naltrexone, you want to look some effect. So I think I put this in context of the guideline, but again, obviously practical different. But the idea here is that is there any effect? Is there a subjective craving decreasing? Is he able to reduce his drinking from heavy drinking to at least moderate drinking? Then you have response to it, and you can continue. There's a point, in this case. Yeah.
We often tend to choose these agents based on the type of craving post when we see the patient. How far is this justified, or should we go more by the typologies or by the earlier history? Because often we see patients in type of reward craving or relief craving, obsessional craving. So is it more pertinent or justified to choose it based on the type of craving they have, or is it more pertinent to choose it on the basis of the typology?
I think you have to make a cocktail of both. But I think the typology gives a good idea as a longitudinal part. See, as we were discussing again and again, addiction conceptualizing a chronic brain disorder is a developmental disorder. As you know, it's like a pediatric developmental disorder. So you have to keep that in mind. On the broad rubric, craving definitely plays a role. So there's no unitary mechanism to divide. I mean, there's a challenge in the whole thing, and there's a reason you use a variety of, and this have few agent I've shown here. So you have a combination of thing works.
Plus, although we say anti-craving drugs, these are not necessarily anti-craving drugs. Some of them deal with satiety. Baclofen deals with your, emotional balance. It really doesn't reduce the craving per se. And craving is not a very clear phenomenon. Craving is a very, very dirty phenomenon. It consists of many, many items. So, I mean, again, I doubt whether you can make distinctions between obsessive craving and all the other lists of craving. That the first time I heard of some of them, I don't know where you got it, but you take everything into.
Okay, it doesn't look like any.
Now, what about number needed to treat for baclofen and naltrexone?
I think naltrexone I mentioned, ma'am, around 9 to 10. Now, baclofen, you don't have actually so much data available. I mean,
If we go by our data, the NNT is probably lower, much lower. Yeah. And there's a paper which is sending around. Naltrexone is likely. I mean, naltrexone and acamprosate are very, very high NNTs. Topiramate NNT is around 3. Baclofen is likely to be around there. So.
I think very interesting question, Dr. Saurabh. I think, sir, you can answer. Any drug targeting CRF? I think, Saurabh, it's a very important, pertinent question. CRF path, and which is a dark side of addiction, they call it. I think, yeah. So I think that's why I mentioned about prazosin. A few trials already started in prazosin, and I think my colleague Arun also is working on some of the areas of corticosteroid and stress pathway. And I think this might be the future lead. And again, it's a subgroup of people. It might not be all, but definitely this is a very,
The actually, there's a very, very interesting line of work which is developed around the entire area. And some of the drugs which have been looked at are drugs which are methyl, change the methylation of the genes.
Okay.
Which and some of them are already being used in cancer therapies. Valproate is one such drug which has been looked at as an effective mechanism to do that.
So at this point of time, prazosin looks very promising, and probably we need to. I mean, we need to start and see. I mean, basically, we have not started using, but definitely studies started coming. Also, atypical antipsychotic looks like it's coming, big way. Like quetiapine, aripiprazole, low dosage has been started coming up. Aripiprazole.
Dr. Ravikant wants to know where can we get IPS guidelines for SUD? We got a synopsis in
You have, I think you have to contact Dr. Dalal, who is the national chair. Dr. P.K. Dalal, who is the national chair for the, for the substance use. He's in KGMC. Just drop a mail to him. Probably he might help you.
Dr. Saurav Das wants to know prazosin used.
Saurabh, I have to go back and read and tell you. I will mail you back. I forgotten. I will get you back. Right. Should we close now? I think let's close our session. I think thanks to all of you for your active participation and suggestions and comments. We will meet again in the next week. Tomorrow, Dr. John has come. Okay.